What if I told you the Great Wall of China wasn't really built to keep invaders out, but to keep you in? Would you be angry or curious? We grow up repeating the myth that the wall is a single mighty battle line, holding back endless horsemen from the north. But when you unroll the records and walk the wall with the people who actually lived under it, you find a sharper truth. By the Ming Dynasty, the wall had been upgraded into a 21,000-kilometer border control machine part fortress, part checkpoint, part customs bureau, part intelligence network, part labor registry. It filtered people, goods, taxes, information, and even hope. Tonight, I'm not here to recite a textbook. I'm here to ask the question that will blow up the comments. Was the Great Wall a shield or a chain? Forget the postcard drone shots for a moment. Step into the year 1555 as a frontier merchant approaching Xiongnu Pass, the stone throat of the Hexi Corridor. Beacon towers stand like clenched fists on the ridges. The gate arch is a shadowed mouth rimmed with iron. You think you just pay a duty and move along? Not even close. First, the clerks examine your travel license, your due tie and guan tie matching names, faces, head count, pack animals, weight, origin, destination. Then evaluator prices your loads at the official schedule salt. Tea, iron, silk cross checking against last month's rates and the authorized market for step exchange. Then the inquiry. Who vouched for you at the horse market? What banner did you trade with? Are you uncle to that herder who was once questioned for guiding raiders? Why is your caravan 3 animals heavier than your last entry? None of this is war. All of it is governance. Shanghai Pass, Zhuang Pass, Jiayu Pass were not holes in a wall. They were giant turnstiles where everything had to squeeze through and everything got written down. You could argue, order is good. Order keeps people safe. True order can blunt surprise attacks, but ask the harder question. Order for whom? The exact same system that screened spies also trapped residents. If you were the son of a hereditary garrison household, one of the weisuo military families who owed service generation after generation, the gates could stop your feet. Try to run from a winter posting on a wind-skinned ridge? A gate captain would send you back to your village register, and your father would owe service for your absence, on top of his own. From Xiongnu and Mongol onward, the state planted a human mesh across the frontier. The guard banner system bound officers, soldiers' wives, and sons into ledgers. Garrison farms were meant to feed the troops without draining the interior. The beacon network pulsed vertical warnings from border to route to court. Impressive? Absolutely. But ask who gets the first call. The messages sprinted to the throne, not to the villagers. The wall became a nervous system, and the brain it served sat in Beijing. Trade sounded noble in the book lines, tea for horses, mutual benefit of field and steppe. On the ground, it was gate for market. Markets opened only at designated passes. Prices were set by proclamations, and the officials behind the account tables decided which things could move and which people could pass. Steppe merchants were forced to choose between the state price and hunger. Inland traders who tried to skirt the gate on a side path risked confiscation, kang, or exile. So the wall did not just block Mongols. It pinched trade routes, clenched tax streams, and gripped population flows. But without a wall, you might say, cavalry would ride right into the capital. The uncomfortable evidence says otherwise. Oirat leaders, tuned khans, and Shaher rulers rarely had butted the brick line for long. They detoured through thinly guarded stretches, bought passage through petty posts, or cut bargains with border officers. Altan Khan famously thundered to the outskirts of Beijing in 1550, proving that a wall is never a perfect lid. External enemies found seams because they were flexible. Internal people could not, because they were not allowed. That's what I mean by filter. Outsiders probe for cracks. Insiders face the gate. When you read that the Ming repaired the northern frontier under Zhuangdi, or that in the Jiajing reign the long walls were massively rebuilt, it feels like more defense. Crack open the statutes, the Ming Hui Dian, the Huang Ming Tiafa Shillei, and look at the budget lines. The big numbers aren't just bricks. They are grain transport quotas, garrison farm recovery, conscription rotations, order household ledgers. In other words, half of fixing the wall was fixing the system that ran through it. How to push military grain north without it vanishing into middlemen. How to keep soldiers from descending the mountain in winter to moonlight as porters. How to ensure every body in bale crossing a gate left its name and a trace of silver. Here's the second uncomfortable question. We romanticize, one man holds the pass. 10,000 cannot open it. But if one day the 10,000 who cannot open are just ordinary people, is it still romantic? Shift the camera to a soldier on a lonely beacon tower. We imagine torchlight when the enemy arrives. Ming beacons actually had a grammar. 1 smoke and 1 fire for small alert, 2 for medium, 3 for major. Different directions relayed on different chains. Drums and horns if the weather was foul. And strict timing, so the capital knew when a report began. It was brilliantly fast, but notice the traffic is one way. A widow's plea about a garrison's missing rations does not ride the smoke. A merchant's grievance about a corrupt gate captain does not lodge in that fiery code. The wall turbocharged enemy news upward and clogged people news at the gate. This isn't a moral verdict. It's a structural observation. Did the wall also protect? Of course it did. After Yongl's northern campaigns, the eastern frontier went years without deep penetrations. In the late Jiajing era, Qi Jiguang's drilled troops cut bandits and raiders down to size along the southern runs of the wall. The point is not no protection. The point is protection and control rode in the same saddle. Document checks thwarted infiltrators and deserters. Unified markets deterred enemy scouts and trapped steppe economies under a state price. Outcomes depended on who you were. For the palace, the wall was a buffer. For many subjects, it was a threshold. Even if you believe extraordinary times require extraordinary measures, you must admit that extraordinary measures grow habits. When the storm passes, the gates remain. When the fear recedes, the lock remembers how to click. To keep this human, walk with someone who never makes the chronicles, the wife of a garrison soldier in a wind-hair winter. She carries a bolt of home-woven cloth to the bazaar near a pass, hoping to trade for salt. Her husband sleeps in armor 2 out of every 6 nights, the beacon tower burning his eyes. At the gate, a clerk weighs the cloth, flips a schedule, and tells her the official market rate sits a rung below what the town stalls pay, then adds a gate duty on the salt she will take home. She says, "Isn't the wall here to protect us?" The deputy never looks up. To protect you, we must manage you. Harsh? Yes. But if you were the deputy, would you risk leniency? Lax checks mean failure to detect on your head. Lax taxes mean hungry troops. Lax control means empty garrisons. Everyone is self-justified inside the logic of a giant system, and that is exactly why giant systems bite without noticing. I am not asking you to condemn the Great Wall as a shackle. I am asking you to examine what it became when the Ming welded fortifications to files, to prices, to passes, to police. A megastructure can hold 5 functions at once: defense, customs, migration control, intelligence, and military logistics, and that composite feels like safety from one angle and pressure from another. So let's test the claim the hard way. In part 2, we'll follow 3 sharp-edged stories with receipts. How cavalry got around the wall, not through it, and reached the capital suburbs. How a single family number carved into a garrison ledger chained 3 generations to 1 watchtower. And how the very decades of massive wall works also produced the infamous scissors gap, with official horse and tea prices slicing below street prices and bleeding both steppe and market. Watch those cases, then come back and tell me, with a straight face, whether the Great Wall was primarily a shield or a chain. Let's start with the sharpest edge. When cavalry did not break the wall, they simply never met it head on. Case 1, the bypass. In 1449, Ezen Tashi's Oirat coalition drew Ming forces into the steppe and smashed them at Tumu, capturing the sitting emperor. He didn't batter down battlements. He pulled the court outside the belt, then cut supply and annihilated the escort. A century later, in 1550, Altan Khan came sweeping along weakly held corridors between fortified nodes, slipping past hard gates and lighting the Beijing suburbs. Contemporary reports describe torchlight so bright you could read by it outside the Shang Gate. If the wall were a single line, this would be impossible. But the wall was a net, tight at knots, loose in spans. The nomad logic was simple: probe the seams, bribe the small posts, parley with hungry border officers, and ride fast where masonry is thin and vigilance thinner. Beacon smoke rose, relief troops scrambled. The court negotiated tribute markets to cool the blaze. The story doesn't disprove value. It redefines it. The wall deterred frontal collision, so opponents chose oblique paths. A shield diverted the spear. It did not erase it. Case 2. The chain in the ledger. The weisuo system stuffed the frontier with hereditary military households. On paper, it was elegant. Each guard, wei, composed of battalions, suo, each suo fed by garrison farms, so imperial granaries wouldn't bleed. In practice, across the 15th and 16th centuries, the harvests failed on poor soils, soldiers took side work or rented out their plots, and officers squeezed the rolls to keep numbers up. The register hardened into fate. A son born to a garrison household was a soldier by birth, even if he had the hands of a potter or the mind of a scribe. Try to step out of your slot, and a gate would call you back. The rule book called it control of service, but to a family it read as life sentence. I want you to picture 3 generations at the same watchtower. Grandfather with a scar under the eye from a winter patrol. Father who can judge the wind just by the sting at the teeth. Son who dreams of following a merchant caravan inland, but knows the clerk at the gate will bend over the register and find his number. The beacon grammar we praised in Part 1, the 1 smoke 2 smoke urgency code, worked flawlessly for alarms. But for a boy with a number in a margin, it was just a siren that never once cried the sound of his choice. Case 3. The scissors. The same decades of grand repairs, the bricks we take photos with today, coincided with price controls that cut commerce at the throat. Officials shouted, "Peace by market," while the state set horse prices low, tea prices low, and punished usury where private exchange tried to float. The result is in the memorials. Official price below street price, merchants dumping low quality to meet quotas, step sellers turning away when the margin made winter fatal. The government then blamed smugglers and black market riders, tightening patrols between passes to net the only channels that worked. Does this sound familiar? A policy declares harmony and ends up criminalizing the breathing space that ordinary people use to stay alive. The wall wasn't the cause. It was the hardware that made such software enforceable. Now step out of the cases and into the map. The Ming frontier was organized into 9 great defense zones: the Zhu Boyan, Liaodong, Qijin, Xuanfu, Datong, Taiyuan, Yansu, Gansu, Gaoyuan, each with its own wall segments, passes, arsenals, and granary lines into the interior. You were not facing one wall. You were moving through a layered architecture. Outer ditches, earthen ramparts, capped in brick, crenellated parapets, inner walls guarding valleys, and the les. 3-line strategy that Qi Jigong later sharpened in the southeast skirmish. Line, main line, reserve Capet on the northern runs to answer raiders and bandits alike. Notice how easily the military logic fuses with police logic. A 3-line defense is perfect for funneling an enemy and a population. When the court feared infiltration, the same tripwire became a sieve with grain finer than sand. When famine bit a neighboring province, the same passes that kept step sellers honest now kept empty-handed migrants out. The rhetoric stayed security. The felt experience slid to permission. Consider the administrative ecology behind every stone. You needed a chain of granaries, zongkang, fenkang, to keep men upright on the wall. You needed corvée carriers to run the grain. You needed legia household quotas to assign those carriers. You needed salt certificates to keep carriers paid. You needed salt routes protected by yet more posts. A fortress is never just a fortress. It is a knot in a web that spreads into tax cards, salt tickets, household rosters, mule hires, and seasonal travel bans. Turn a knob at a pass, and the muscles twitch 1,000 li away. Does that make the wall evil? No, it makes it powerful, and therefore double-edged. I can hear the counter-arguments already, and we need them in the comments because they keep us honest. Without the wall, the cost of cavalry raids would have been unbearable. Maybe the Jiajing era reconstructions in Qijiung's discipline saved countless villages. Probably. You're judging a pre-modern state with modern values. Fair push. So let's play fair with the numbers. After the Tumu shock, the Ming invested massively in fixed defenses and created the 9 garrison system I just sketched. Raids did not stop, but the cost of deep penetration went up, and the average raid grew shorter, more seasonal, and more dependent on negotiation, tribute markets, and hostage exchange tools of politics, not victory. That is precisely my point. The wall worked best not as a sword breaker, but as a bargaining chip. It made sudden overruns harder, made the court harder to scare, and therefore made trade and treaty more attractive to both sides. In that reading, the wall did its job. But look at the price paid by people who are not parties to the bargain. The garrison family chained to a roster. The merchant ground down by official price. The refugee turned away at a gate because the grain ledger for that month had no room. This is where the shield or chain debate stops being cute and starts being real. To keep this grounded, let's walk a day with 3 characters. First, a steppe trader named Borjigin Baida, who learned enough market Chinese to argue rates. He arrives at a designated horse market outside Zhuang Pass, a world of dust, stamps, and abacus clacks. He's told the official horse price is set 2 cash below what he can survive on this winter. He can accept and go hungry, refuse and ride home with nothing, or try the invisible road, a night path along gullies to a village that pays better but will get him flogged if caught. He knows the wall doesn't only block him. It discards his choices. He chooses the night road. Second, a young clerk at Shanghai Pass named Liu, who studies the ledgers like scripture. He hates turning away a boy whose mother is ill, but last month the inspector cross-checked a bundle of exit slips, and 2 numbers didn't match the sequence. The captain lost a month's pay. Everyone is watching. Liu stamps denied with a shaking hand. He tells himself that discipline prevents disaster. He tells himself the wall is a shield. He goes home and cannot sleep. Third, a widow named Zhang who has already pawned her hairpin. She walks 30 li with a basket of persimmons to trade for salt. The wall in front of her is beautiful in the way that hurts, a river of brick across a heaven of stone. At the gate, a junior guard jokes that persimmons count as luxury fruit and doubles the duty. Because the quota is short and the senior is glaring, she pays and tastes the coinless winter in her mouth. For the magistrate's account, the system worked. A smuggler deterred, a roster aligned, a quota met. For 3 lives, it felt like being pressed between 2 stones. There is another angle we rarely talk about, who authored the myth of pure defense. The wall's nationalist halo is mostly modern. Late Qing reformers and Republic-era textbooks needed symbols of endurance, unity, and technological awe. The physical wall fit the emotional bill far better than the messy reality of negotiation, tribute, and compromise that actually kept the frontier calm more often than battle did. Tourism posters later gave us the horizon line image. A dragon of brick across a sea of mountains, all serenity and might, none of the clerks, stamps, and gateside tears. Was the symbol wrong? Symbols are allowed to be simple. But when the symbol replaces the story, we lose the tools to ask policy questions that still matter. Especially because what the Ming built out there, fortification fused to file, is a template modern states still use only with fiber optics. Instead of beacon smoke, smart checkpoints exit controls customs, harmonized with population databases razor wire, wrapped in the language of safety. Whether you cheer or fear, that depends on your values. My job is to show the lineage. Before we close part 2, let me stress what I am not saying. I am not saying tear down walls or deny the fear of raids. I am saying that every wall worth its brick will eventually learn more tricks than defense, and, if it works, will be praised by the center while felt as weight on the edges. The people who bear it will call it chain. The people it reassures will call it shield. Both can be telling the truth at once. In part 3, I'm going to flip the telescope one last time. How the wall's control functions shaped the Ming's politics and economy in the long run. How crisis and repair cycles hardened institutions that outlived the threats they were built for. Why some dynasties trusted posts and smoke, others trusted silver and speech. And finally, the question no one likes. If you were emperor, and you really feared a night of torches rising beyond the ridge, would you build the same machine? Or would you dare to trade bricks for bargains sooner, and accept the risks that come with trust? Bring your answer, your anger, and your evidence to the comments. Shield or chain is not a slogan here. It's a vote about what we think states are for. To finish this honestly, we need to leave the ramparts and follow the wall's logic into the Ming court, into budgets, bargaining, and the kind of choices that make or break dynasties. A wall is not just stone. It is a decision renewed every year at tax time, enforced every hour at a gate. Once you see it that way, patterns pop out. Start with the bill. Fortifying the northern frontier after Tumu wasn't a weekend project. It was a generational mortgage. Moving brick and grain along bad roads cost more than the brick and grain themselves. For every dough of millet you wanted a soldier to eat at a pass, you budgeted another dough to pay the carriers who hauled it there, and another sliver to compensate the corvée households who lost days in their fields. Granary leaks losses to rot, pilferage, delay piled up like frost. That is why the statutes obsess over granary chains, central storehouses, zhangkang, branch storehouses, fenkang, relay points, seasonal quotas. When you commit to walls, you commit to logistics, and logistics eats silver the way fire eats pine. The longer the frontier, the hungrier the fire. That pressure squeezed decisions far from the frontier. The court doubled down on monopolies that raised predictable revenue. The salt certificate system that turned salt into tax currency. The tea regulations that underwrote horse purchases. The registry that fixed households to corvée loads. When revenue ran short and transport costs rose, the center didn't cancel the march. It lowered official purchase prices and raised compliance, creating exactly the scissors that cut merchants and herders in part 2. And then came the reform that everyone quotes because it changed everything, the single whip, Yi Chuabian. In the 1580s, to simplify a snarled, in-kind tax world, the Ming started converting labor and grain obligations into a consolidated silver payment. On paper, elegant. In practice, it welded the frontier to a global metal. Spain's American silver flooded China through Manila, and the wall's payroll began to depend on ocean winds. When silver supply hiccuped storms, piracy, embargo, the garrisons shivered. A ruined harvest in Mexico could ripple into a hungry night at Yansui. That is the fate of a fortification when it marries a money system. It becomes a coin, us hostage. You can read the anxiety in memorials, pleading to reopen markets with the steppe to ease pressure, in petitions urging that official prices be raised to keep peace, in scoldings about private traders enticing soldiers to sell rations. Nothing here makes the Ming uniquely cruel. It makes them recognizably governmental. Still, choices matter, and the court often chose brick over bargain until bargains were forced by fire. Let us put the choice under a bright light with a hard example. The Wanli Court's coast or wall dilemma. Piracy, woko, and gray market trade along the southeast sucked garrison grain and attention away from the north. The sea ban, hygiene, strangled legal commerce and bred better smugglers. Whenever the state clamped down at sea, the north's market tools lost leverage and troops at the passes got bricker but hungrier. Whenever the state loosened at sea, tax farmers and coastal brokers grew fat while frontier accountants fumed at leakage. The wall looked sturdy in paintings. In ledgers, it was always on fire, fiscal fire. And yet, amid the arithmetic, there were flashes of genius. Qi Jiguang's layered defenses earthworks, ahead of brick mobile response, behind ramparts drilled infantry, trained to meet raids as moving. Puzzles, not monolithic threats, was a way of admitting the wall's truth. The masonry must be paired with movement the pass, with patrols, the file with a commander who knows when to bend the rules. Where that blend took root, raids got shorter and bargains got cheaper. Where it didn't, the wall hardened and hardness cracked. Now, zoom out to dynasty scale. The more a regime invests in fixed border hardware, the more its interior institutions evolve to feed it. That path dependence lingers after the reason fades. A famine recedes, the gate rules stay, a threat retreats. The watch remains because the ledger still needs two signatures. Inertia is a political actor, which is why the most fateful day in the wall's story, heightened a glorious defense, but a hinge. The spring of 1644 at Shanhai Pass. The rebel Li Ziqing had sacked Beijing. The Ming was bleeding to its end. General Wu Sangui, caught between the rebel and the Manchu Prince Dorgan beyond the pass, chose the latter and opened the gate. Read that again. The wall's gateway designed to filter step riders became the hinge that swung a new dynasty into China. A lock is power. A lock in the wrong hands is transfer of power. If you want a single cinematic answer to shield or chain, it is this: the Great Wall was a hinge. It could swing shut on a raider. It could swing open for a conqueror. It all depended on whose hand gripped the bar. The Qing that followed understood horses and people as well as brick. They dragged banners through the gates and then did something telling. They did not obsess over rebuilding every stretch of masonry. They managed the frontier with mobile forces, layered alliances, and crucially coopted Mongol elites into an imperial order that made stone less urgent than oath. They used posts and permits where needed, but their frontier logic privileged cavalry and incorporation over bricks and bands. That contrast matters. It tells us that walls are not destiny. They are policy preferences made tangible. And policies can be traded. Brick for bargain, embargo for licensed trade, levy for stipend. The wall makes each of those choices more forceful, not more wise. Before we close, let's talk about something that makes people uncomfortable: pride. The Great Wall is a symbol that millions love because it stands for endurance, engineering flair, and unity against fear. That pride isn't fake. The wall did endure, and it did rally people in bad years. The problem is not pride, it's monopoly. When one story monopolizes a symbol, pure defense, pure glory, we lose the vocabulary to describe everything else the symbol did. Tax, tether, ration, restrain. That is why I vet pushed the chain image so hard, not to erase the shield, but to give you both handles back. A mature conversation about power needs both. So what do we do with a truth this mixed? We ask harder questions than the slogan allows. If you sat on the dragon throne and watched smoke rise beyond the ridge, would you keep building brick until your accounts bled? Or would you legalize more trade across the line and risk a bigger market turning into a bigger Trojan horse? If you ran a pass, would you look the other way when a soldier's son slipped by to study in the interior? Or would you stamp denied because the ledger says so and you have a mother to feed too? If you stood where that widow did with the persimmons and the clerk doubled the duty, would you call the wall your shield with your mouth as your stomach called it a chain? The wall is easy to love from a distance and hard to judge up close. That's exactly why it's the perfect mirror for modern life. We live with softer walls made of databases and turnstiles, permits and price signals. We call them security, compliance, smart borders, harmonized standards. Often they are. Often they protect. And often, without malice, they press. The Ming's beacon grammar is back as instant messaging. The gate ledger is back as an API. The horse market is back as a tariff schedule. The garrison roster is back as a residency app. The names changed. The hinge did not. Does that mean you should hate walls? No. It means you should audit them. Ask who writes the prices, who stamps the permits, who gets the first call when the smoke rises, and whose story never travels up the wire. If a wall stone or software can answer those questions fairly, call it a shield with a clean heart. If it cannot, be honest enough to admit how it drags like a chain and brave enough to file the petition to loosen a link. I'll leave you with 3 propositions to fight over in the comments, because argument is how we learn. 1. The Great Wall worked best not as a sword breaker, but as a bargaining chip. It raised the cost of raids and lowered the cost of negotiation shield and strategy, chain in daily life. 2. The value of the wall was inversely proportional to the court's skill at politics. When statesmen negotiated well, brick mattered less, and when politics failed, the court hid behind stone until coffers cracked. 3. The most dangerous thing a wall can do is convince a center that it knows everything it needs to know. Smoke runs uphill fast. People's voices don't. If those propositions sound wrong, bring sources. If they sound right, bring stories. Either way, make the symbol earn the pride we pin on it. Now choose your label, and choose it with care, because labels lead policy. If you believe the Great Wall was fundamentally protective, comment shield and tell me who it protected most and why. If you believe it was fundamentally restrictive, comment chain and tell me whose life illustrates it best. If you believe it was precisely a filter built to sort threats and, in sorting, to trap innocence, comment filter and defend the nuance. And if you're an emperor for a night, tell me which you'd build more of tomorrow, bricks or bargains. I'll be in the thread with memorials, maps, and counterexamples. Bring your courage and your skepticism. The wall can take it. And if this changed how you see those stones on the ridgeline, subscribe. Next time we'll all take the same scalpel to another monument we think we understand. A border that claims to keep danger out but may exist to price it in. Until then, look hard at every gate you pass. There's always a hand on the bar, sometimes yours, sometimes not.